What if I told you that Goliath wasn't the only giant in the Bible? That the story of David's most famous battle was just the beginning of a much larger war, one filled with ancient bloodlines, mysterious beings, and enemies so massive they seemed impossible to defeat. This video unpacks the full truth behind Goliath and his brothers, revealing what the Bible truly says about giants, their origins, and the faithful warriors who stood against them. Thank you for choosing to watch this video. Here on Sacred Wisdom, we explore the most powerful and mysterious stories in the Bible. If you're someone who loves diving deeper into Scripture beyond the surface, into the symbols, lineages, and prophecies, make sure to subscribe and join us on this journey of discovery. There's so much more waiting for you. Now, let's get started. The most legendary giant in biblical history is Goliath of Gath, a formidable warrior from the Philistine camp. His appearance alone struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. Towering at over 9 feet 9 inches tall, he was an intimidating presence on the battlefield. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verse 4. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. While ancient measurements like cubits are unfamiliar to modern readers, in today's terms, Goliath would have stood nearly 3 meters tall. This height, combined with his armor and weapons, made him seem almost otherworldly. He wore a bronze helmet and a coat of scale armor that weighed more than 125 pounds. His legs were protected with bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung over his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the iron point alone weighed about 15 pounds. Ahead of him walked a shield-bearer, providing an extra layer of defense. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 5 to 7. He wore a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield-bearer went ahead of him. The Philistine giant was not only massive in size and strength, but also well-equipped and protected. He was the embodiment of military power and fear. When Goliath stepped forward, he issued a bold challenge to the army of Israel. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 8 and 9. Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. This type of single combat, representative warfare, was a known tactic in ancient Near Eastern cultures. Goliath presented himself as the champion of the Philistines, demanding that Israel send its own representative to fight in a one-on-one duel that would decide the fate of both armies. For 40 days, Goliath appeared every morning and evening, repeating this challenge with terrifying consistency. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 16. For 40 days, the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. His size, armor, and persistence demoralized the Israelite army. No one dared to accept the challenge. Goliath's defiance and taunts echoed across the valley as fear spread among the troops of Israel and even reached the heart of King Saul himself. The mighty Philistine stood not only as a physical threat, but as a spiritual insult to the people of God. While Goliath issued his challenge day after day, a young shepherd named David remained far from the battlefield. He lived in the hills of Judah near Bethlehem, tending his father's sheep. Too young to be conscripted into Saul's army, David was unaware of the standoff between Israel and the Philistines. His only connection to the war was personal. His 3 older brothers were serving in the army, and his father, Jesse, was growing concerned about them. One morning, Jesse called his youngest son and gave him a task. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 17 and 18. Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers, and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are, and bring back some assurance from them. Obedient and eager, David rose early, left the sheep with a keeper, and set out with supplies. When he arrived, the Israelite army was moving into formation, shouting the war cry. Though David was not a soldier, he rushed forward, leaving his baggage with a supply keeper. He ran to the battle line to greet his brothers, curious about what was going on. But before he could finish his words, the moment that would define his life arrived. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 22 and 23. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance. and David heard it. This was David's first time seeing the giant. His brothers and the rest of Israel's army had already endured 40 days of Goliath's taunts, but for David, this was new. The shout echoed across the valley, and then panic. The entire army around him retreated and hid in fear. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 24. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. David stood still, stunned, not by Goliath's size, but by the fear he witnessed in his own people. While others trembled, David grew angry. He saw more than just a military threat. He saw a man blaspheming the name of the living God. And so he began asking questions. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 26 and 27. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Then he turned to the men standing near him and asked what would be done for the man who kills him. They repeated what they had been told. David's words stirred whispers across the camp until they reached King Saul. Saul summoned David, surprised to see a boy so bold. But David spoke with quiet confidence. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 32 and 33. Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Saul replied, You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. David then shared something remarkable. His courage was not born from pride, but from experience. He had faced wild beasts in the wilderness, lions and bears, and protected the flock entrusted to him. He believed that the God who delivered him before would deliver him again. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 34 to 37. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Convinced by the young man's conviction, Saul agreed and gave David his own armor. But David quickly realized he couldn't wear it. It was too heavy, too unfamiliar. He took it off, picked up his staff, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, placed them in his shepherd's pouch, and approached the battlefield, armed with nothing but a sling and the name of the Lord. As David stepped onto the battlefield, the air grew tense. Across the valley, Goliath spotted him and was instantly offended. He expected a warrior, armored and intimidating, but instead saw a young man, rugged, unarmored, holding only a shepherd's staff and a sling. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 41 to 43. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Goliath mocked David and threatened to feed his flesh to the birds and wild animals. But David stood his ground. He did not flinch, did not retreat. He responded with one of the most powerful declarations of faith in all of Scripture. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 45 to 46. You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. What followed was not a drawn-out fight, but a single decisive moment. As Goliath moved forward, expecting to crush the young shepherd, David ran to meet him. Without hesitation, he reached into his pouch, pulled out one of the 5 smooth stones, placed it in his sling, and let it fly. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 49. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. It was over. Just like that, with no sword, no armor, and no military experience, David had triumphed over the Philistine giant. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 50 and 51. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. The moment Goliath fell, the Philistine army broke into panic. Their champion, unbeatable in their eyes, was gone. The Israelites, inspired and emboldened, let out a victorious shout and surged forward in pursuit. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verses 52 and 53. The men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Shaaraim road. Then the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines and plundered their camp. David brought Goliath's head back to Jerusalem as a trophy, but he kept the giant's sword and armor in his own tent. The boy who came to deliver food had become a legend. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verse 54. David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem. He put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. This was no ordinary military victory. It was a moment that declared to the world that God does not save by sword or spear. He saves through faith, obedience, and bold trust in his name. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verse 47. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. The fall of Goliath did not end the mystery surrounding him. His defeat raised a deeper question. Who was Goliath, really? How could a man be so massive, so strong, and so terrifying that even seasoned soldiers trembled in his presence? Was he simply a large man, or did his bloodline trace back to something more ancient and more dangerous? Many scholars believe Goliath may have belonged to a race of giants known as the Nephilim. These beings are first mentioned in the earliest chapters of Scripture, shrouded in mystery. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. This passage has long puzzled readers. Who were the sons of God, and how did their union with human women produce such mighty offspring? Three major interpretations exist: that the sons of God were fallen angels who took human wives, that they were powerful human rulers or kings, that they were descendants of Seth, the godly lineage, intermarrying with the wicked lineage of Cain. The oldest and most widely accepted view in ancient Judaism and early Christianity is the first, that fallen angels in rebellion against God took human women and fathered a hybrid race of unnatural strength and size, known as the Nephilim. These offspring were described as men of great power and fame, but their existence led to widespread corruption and violence, prompting God to send the flood in the time of Noah. Genesis chapter 6 verse 5. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. If the Nephilim were wiped out in the flood, then how could Goliath, who lived long after, still be connected to them? Some scholars suggest that either the fallen angels repeated their sin after the flood, but on a much smaller scale. The Nephilim traits were carried genetically through one of Noah's daughters-in-law, and re-emerged generations later. Other researchers connect Goliath not directly to the Nephilim, but to other giant clans mentioned in the Bible, specifically the Rephaim and the Anakim. These names appear often in accounts of Israel's conquest of Canaan. Deuteronomy chapter 2 verses 10 to 11. The Emites used to live there, a people strong and numerous and as tall as the Anakites. Like the Anakites, they too were considered Rephites, but the Moabites called them Emites. Deuteronomy chapter 3 verse 11. Only Og king of Bashan was left of the remnant of the Rephites. His bed was made of iron and was more than 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. This would make King Og's bed over 13 feet long and 6 feet wide, far beyond human size. Goliath, then, may have been a descendant of these giants, or at least part of the same corrupted lineage. His hometown of Gath was one of 3 major cities originally inhabited by the Anakim. Joshua chapter 11 verse 22. No Anakites were left in Israelite territory. Only in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod did any survive. So when David stepped onto the battlefield that day, he wasn't just facing a soldier. He was confronting a remnant of a long-standing spiritual threat, one that had terrified generations before him. Goliath stood as the embodiment of that ancient hostility between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. Genesis chapter 3 verse 15. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." Whether Goliath was a true Nephilim or a descendant of the Rephaim or Anakim, the symbolism remains the same. He was not just an enemy of Israel, but an enemy of God's redemptive plan. A towering figure meant to frighten, intimidate, and destroy. But, as David's sling proved, no matter how large the enemy, God's power is greater. Goliath's death was not the end of Israel's war with giants. In fact, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, a series of conflicts with others like him. These were not mere legends or symbols. The Bible names them. It records their weapons, their hometowns, and even their physical deformities. They were real, and their defeat carried deep meaning, that the legacy of Goliath would not be allowed to stand. The first of these giants to appear after Goliath was Ishbi-benob. He came during another battle between Israel and the Philistines, at a time when King David, now older, chose to fight alongside his men. But even kings have limits. 2 Samuel, chapter 21, verses 15 and 16. David went down with his men to fight against the Philistines, and he became exhausted. And Ishbi-benob, one of the descendants of Rapha, whose bronze spearhead weighed 300 shekels, and who was armed with a new sword, said he would kill David. It was a moment of great danger. David, once the fearless youth who had slain Goliath, now stood vulnerable. But just as Goliath had underestimated the power of God, Ishbi-benob made the same mistake. A mighty warrior named Abishai, David's nephew and trusted commander, rushed in to save his king. 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 17. But Abishai son of Zeruiah came to David's rescue. He struck the Philistine down and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, saying, "Never again will you go out with us to battle, so that the lamp of Israel will not be extinguished." The phrase "lamp of Israel" showed how vital David was, not just as a warrior, but as a symbol of God's covenant with his people. From that moment on, David no longer fought giants himself, but others did, men who had trained under his leadership and inherited his courage. In the next battle, another giant appeared, Saph, also a descendant of Rapha. He too fell by the hand of one of David's elite warriors. 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 18. In the course of time, there was another battle with the Philistines at Gob. At that time, Sibbecai the Hushethite killed Saph, one of the descendants of Rapha. Then came Lahmi, the brother of Goliath. His weapon was nearly identical to Goliath's, a spear with a shaft like a weaver's beam. 1 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 5. In another battle with the Philistines, Elhanan son of Jair killed Lahmi, the brother of Goliath the Gittite, who had a spear with a shaft like a weaver's rod. By calling him Goliath's brother, the Bible shows that this was not a one-time anomaly. Goliath came from a family or possibly a military caste of giants who were known and feared. But one by one they fell, not by brute strength, but by the faith and bravery of David's men. The final giant described is perhaps the most shocking. The Bible doesn't give him a name, but it gives an unforgettable description. 1 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 6. In still another battle, which took place at Gath, there was a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He also was descended from Rapha. This was not just a genetic mutation. It was a physical manifestation of how distorted and unnatural this lineage had become. When he taunted Israel, he met the same fate as those before him. Slain by Jonathan, son of Shimea, David's brother. 1 Chronicles chapter 20, verses 7 and 8. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of Shimea, David's brother, killed him. These were descendants of Rapha in Gath, and they fell at the hands of David and his men. Together, these stories show that David's battle with Goliath was just the beginning of a larger war, a spiritual war passed down to a generation of warriors raised in David's shadow. The defeat of Goliath's brothers was not just military victory, it was a spiritual cleansing, a symbolic end to a corrupted bloodline that had long opposed the will of God. Their names, Ishbi-benob, Saph, Lahmi, and the unnamed 6-fingered giant, may not be as well known as Goliath, but they represent the same threat, the same pride, and the same downfall. And each time they fell not to kings or champions, but to men who believed that the battle is the Lord's. To truly understand the threat posed by Goliath and his brothers, we must return to where the story of the giants first began, before the flood in the days of Noah. It was during this ancient era that the Bible first mentions the Nephilim, a race whose very existence represented a direct corruption of God's design for humanity. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 2. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. These sons of God have sparked centuries of debate. While some interpret them as noble men or rulers, the most ancient and consistent interpretation views them as fallen angels, spiritual beings who rebelled against their divine order and took human women for themselves. Their union produced offspring that were unnatural, violent, and dangerous to the very fabric of humanity. Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. These heroes were not heroes in the moral sense. They were men of great power and reputation, yes, but their legacy was destruction. The world they shaped was filled with wickedness, bloodshed, and perversion. This was no ordinary corruption. It was systemic, widespread, and spiritual in nature. God looked down and saw that the infection had spread too far. Genesis chapter 6, verse 5. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The world was beyond repair. Humanity had aligned itself with darkness, and so God made a decision, a reset, not out of cruelty, but out of righteousness. Not because he had given up on creation, but because he would preserve it through a faithful remnant. Genesis chapter 6, verse 6. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. Yet even in judgment there was grace. Amidst a world of violence stood one man, Noah, who had not been corrupted. Genesis chapter 6, verse 9. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. God instructed Noah to build an ark, a vessel of survival not only for him and his family, but for the preservation of life on earth. Through this act, God would cleanse the earth of its corruption and give humanity a second beginning. Genesis chapter 6, verse 13. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. Why was the flood necessary? Because the very gene pool of humanity had been compromised. The Messiah, the one prophesied in Eden to crush the serpent's head, could not be born into a corrupted, demonically tainted bloodline. By saving Noah and his family, God ensured the preservation of a purer lineage through which salvation would one day come. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. But here's the mystery. After the flood, giants appear again. Goliath, his brothers, the Rephaim, the Anakim. How? Some believe that fallen angels repeated their sin after the flood, though perhaps not to the same extent. Others suggest that the Nephilim traits may have been carried unknowingly through one of Noah's daughters-in-law and emerged generations later. Whatever the explanation, the lesson remains. When humanity crosses spiritual boundaries it was never meant to cross, the result is chaos. But God, in his mercy, always raises up a righteous remnant to restore what has been lost. The Bible never tells us that giants ceased to exist after David killed Goliath. Instead, it tells us something more powerful, that they can be defeated not by those with the biggest weapons, but by those with the greatest faith. Goliath's death was dramatic, but it was only the beginning. His brothers fell one by one, not because David fought every battle himself, but because he inspired others to believe, to stand, to fight. His victory over Goliath became a legacy, a seed of courage that grew in the hearts of his warriors. Those men, once hidden in fear, would later rise up and slay giants of their own. And this was always God's way. He chooses the humble over the proud, the faithful over the fearful. He turned shepherds into kings and stones into weapons. Every time a giant fell, it wasn't just a win on the battlefield. It was a reminder. The Lord is greater than any enemy. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 47. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. The giants of the Bible, Goliath, Ishbi-benob, Saph, Lahmi, the six-fingered man, represent more than just physical threats. They are symbols of fear, oppression, hopelessness. And yet, each of them fell before men who stood firm in the name of God. Faith isn't about never being afraid. It's about moving forward despite the fear, trusting that you do not fight alone. That's what David showed Israel. That's what Jonathan, Abishai, and Elhanan carried into their battles, and that's what we must carry into ours. Today, our giants may look different. They may take the form of anxiety, injustice, addiction, or despair. But the truth is the same. Giants fall when the faithful stand. David's legacy didn't end on the battlefield. It continued through his leadership, through his psalms, through his descendants, ultimately leading to the birth of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, the true and final giant slayer. Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. The victories of David were never just about military success. They were about preparing the way for something greater, for someone greater, and that's where we come in. Because David's victories were passed down not just to his soldiers, but to all who walk in faith. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. That's the power David tapped into, and it's the same power that's available to you. Not through might, not through strategy, but through belief. Belief that God still fights for his people. When you face your Goliath, remember this. You may feel small, underprepared, or overwhelmed. But if you fight in faith, you are never alone. The same God who guided a stone into a giant's forehead is still at work today, guiding, defending, and leading those who trust him. Romans chapter 8, verse 31. If God is for us, who can be against us? David's sling is no longer needed. The real weapon now is belief. The kind of belief that acts, that speaks, that refuses to back down when the enemy roars. So let the legacy of David speak not just of victory, but of vision. Let it remind us that faith is generational, that courage can be taught, and that no enemy is too big when you walk with the living God. Even giants fall. If you've made it to this point, thank you. Not just for watching, but for walking with us through one of the most profound and mysterious narratives in Scripture. The story of Goliath and his brothers is more than a tale of giants and battles. It's a story about what happens when faith confronts fear, when the seemingly insignificant dares to challenge the impossible. It reminds us that we don't need to be the strongest to be victorious. We just need to stand in the name of the Lord. Maybe you too are facing a giant. It may not wear armor or carry a sword, but it still taunts you, threatens you, and tries to steal your courage. Let this story remind you, even giants fall. And if this message stirred something in you, if it made you think, reflect, or feel a little stronger, consider subscribing, not for numbers, but for the journey. Here at Sacred Wisdom, we explore the deep and timeless truths of the Bible, one story at a time. There are still so many battles to unpack. So many names you've never heard, so many mysteries waiting to be revealed. Join us and let's keep discovering together